All right, thank you very much, Celia. From the late 1840s to his death, Richard Wagner's pronouncements about art and music were intimately associated with his thinking about German national identity. In many respects, this cultural approach to thinking about and articulating a sense of Germanness placed Wagner firmly within the mainstream, even as late as the 1860s. For in the absence of a German national state, and no less important, a space where Germans could freely and openly articulate an overtly political discourse on German nationalism, 19th century partisans of the German national idea continued in the same vein established by Johann Gottlieb von Herder, Ernst Moritz Arndt, at the beginning of the century, contending that Germany already existed as a linguistic and cultural entity. The promotion of German culture and art through singing societies and musical journals, the collection of folklore and the organization of gymnastics clubs and competitions, this served a crucial dual purpose. These activities nourished and disseminated German values, while also giving the idea of Germany tangible expression, such as in the string of celebrations across German-speaking Europe commemorating the 100th anniversary of Friedrich Schiller's birthday in 1859, and the All-German Festival of Sharpshooters Clubs held at Frankfurt am Main in 1862. And yet, Wagner's contributions to the phenomenon of cultural nation building in Germany were quite distinctive. The Zurich essays of 1849-1850, above all Art and Revolution, Artwork of the Future, and Opera and Drama, notably contend that the current state of German cultural life was so woeful that before Germany could be reborn as a political entity, there also had to be a full-scale artistic and cultural revival. Of course, Wagner, modest man that he was equally convinced that he knew how to realize the cultural and political goal. Just as the ancient Greeks had relied on the theater to nurture a sense of cultural cum political community, so too should the modern Germans, albeit in the form of what Wagner came to call music drama. As is well known, Wagner's famous encounter with Schopenhauer in 1856 led him to abandon the more utopian dimensions of his belief in music drama as Gesamtkunstwerk. Nonetheless, it is equally clear that Wagner never gave up on his conviction that the renewal of the theater, especially in the form of music drama, was essential to German political regeneration. This belief emerges clearly in his report to King Ludwig II on the establishment of a German school of music in Munich of 1865, as well as in the essays What is German, published in 1878, although written earlier, and Religion and Art in 1880. Admittedly, much of what I have just said is fairly well known to Wagner specialists and perhaps to a lesser degree scholars of 19th century German nationalism. But I would suggest that Wagner's promotion of music drama as German national art is a much more complicated topic than scholars have usually admitted. And promotion really is the operative word here. For if, building on the argument established by or advanced by Nicholas Vazsonyi in his book on the Wagner brand, if we take a more cynical approach to much of Wagner's writing on music and theater, viewing it essentially as a means both to legitimate his own take on opera and to recruit and train the artists necessary to perform it, then we need also to interrogate Wagner's central and actually audacious claim that opera can be, indeed must become, German national art. I'd like thus to structure my remarks today as a set of reflections on two questions that I see as especially important in this context. First and primarily, given the nature of German social and cultural conditions in the final half of the 19th century, could opera, and Wagner's music drama in particular, realistically hope to be popularized for nationalist and nationalizing purposes? And second, what consequences might the responses to this first question have for our understanding of Wagner as a German nationalist, and perhaps also our understanding of music and national culture in Germany? So to the first question. That Wagner was a prominent champion of German art, that he fervently wished for a German national state that would nurture and protect German culture, is readily apparent in his prose writings and, to varying degrees, in the themes treated in his dramatic oeuvre. Nonetheless, as numerous scholars have discovered to this dismay, it is nearly impossible to develop from the voluminous writings of Wagner and his circle a clear picture of Wagner's political views vis-à-vis a German national state. The composer's distaste for the Bismarckian solution of 1870 and 71 became increasingly evident in the final decade of his life, While the composition of the network of Patronatsvereine and his decision to settle in Bayreuth both suggest an ongoing loyalty to a version of a Großdeutschland, albeit not necessarily one led by the Austrian Habsburgs. Indeed, the evidence seems to suggest that to the end, Wagner remained above all a cultural nationalist, with the implication, as George Williamson has noted in his study of myth in 19th century Germany, that ultimately Wagner was much more concerned with the search for the nation, for the longing for the nation, with Werden, than with the nation's actual realization and existence, its Sein. Now, if I dwell perhaps overlong on the ambiguities in Wagner's political views, it is because I think this same language of Werden and Sein is most useful for thinking in new ways about Wagner's primary contributions to the process of cultural nation building in Germany, the creation and production of music drama. For as he argues time and again in his musings on aesthetics and theater following the revolutions of 1848, the path towards cultural renewal requires much more than the transformation of opera into music drama, that is, the creation of a theatrical work where poetry, music, and stagecraft all combine together in the pursuit of a single theatrical vision. It also requires the development of theatrical works that are specifically German, that is, ones that explicate the myths of the German past for the cultural, moral, and social needs of the German present. Of course, in such essays as The Artwork of the Future, Wagner freely admitted that such German music drama did not yet exist. And he fully intended to have a major hand in creating such works. Indeed, one might even go so far as to say that Wagner's Zurich writings aimed to suggest that only he could deliver what Germany really needed. But for now, both the new genre and the attendant cultural regeneration still lay in the realm of becoming, of Werden. This said, and paraphrasing the title of Udo Bernbach's fine study, the Wahn of Wagner's vision of Gesamtkunstwerk and music drama as contributions to the process of nation building in Germany lies at a more fundamental level. For at heart, Wagner's plan entailed both the creation of a German operatic tradition, and I employ that term on purpose here, even if Wagner refused to, and is embraced by large segments of, if not all, the German folk. As was his wont, Wagner minced few words with respect to the first point. After all, it provided much of the justification for his artistic and theatrical endeavors. For instance, in his report to King Ludwig II on the creation of a national music school, Wagner observes that the creation of a conservatory in Germany would be a curious venture, since in contrast to both Italy and France, Germany did not really have a classic style to be conserved, at least in terms of music, theater, or opera. Implied here, of course, is that Wagner's stage dramas would provide the stuff for the learning, promotion, and propagation of this German musical and theatrical style. Once again, we are in the presence of Wagner's self-promotion as the epitome of German music, of a self-consciously German form of art. Ironically, though, Wagner's very success in defining German opera in terms of his own production meant that after his death, German opera again witnessed a fallow period, lasting roughly until the emergence of Richard Strauss, as German composers tended to avoid the genre rather than suffering unflattering comparisons with the master's works. Nevertheless, as I hinted at the outset, the real weakness in Wagner's ideas on cultural nation building is his assumption that opera cum music drama could be an effective vehicle for promoting national regeneration. 19th century Germany, after all, was not 19th century Italy. Had Giuseppe Verdi, someone who's also celebrating his 200th anniversary this year, had Verdi, for instance, wished to imbue his operas with ideological didactic purpose, something in which he actually had no interest whatsoever, as part of a broader plan to help make Italians, a process that was going almost simultaneously with making Germans to the north, this would not have been a far-fetched idea. After all, in the land of Verdi, opera appealed to a broad, socially diverse public. It was both a wildly popular form of entertainment, but also a national subject of debate and discussion. The same could not be said of Germany either before or after unification in 1871. Although there existed a tradition of popular spoken theater in the German-speaking lands, musical theater, whatever name we wish to give it, was firmly in the realm of elite culture. Ticket prices and at times the language of performance both largely prevented opera going by members of the lower classes and even the middling bourgeoisie. But in German-speaking Europe, we must also remember opera houses were still primarily institutions of the court, or in places like Hamburg and Bremen, institutions closely associated with the urban patriciate. In short, not only did German-speaking Europe lack its own operas, which Wagner was also getting at here, it lacked the very tradition of theater as communal practice on which Wagner's theories and dreams of national birth rested. And in that respect, Wagner's belief that the practices of Hellenic Greece could be updated and adapted to the needs of Germans in the 19th century, which is one way we might gloss the argument of opera and drama, really was a pipe dream. Now, one might object that Wagner was not fully unaware of this problem, inasmuch as he also sought to reinvigorate and, we might say, Wagnerize the idea of festival theater. Nonetheless, even had the fundraising campaign in the early 1870s succeeded as Wagner had hoped, thereby enabling Germans of any social standing to participate in the 1876 premiere of the Ring tetralogy, it is hard to imagine that the Bayreuth Festspielhaus as an operatic field of dreams. That is, building the theater would not in and of itself ensure that people would come and experience German music drama. For around 1875, there was still no general cultural practice of festival theater in Germany, nor had any real progress been made between, say, 1850 and 1875 in democratizing opera in what became Imperial Germany. In other words, since most Germans of Wagner's day did not know opera like Americans in the late 20th century knew baseball, few would be likely to attend even if the tickets were free. Furthermore, I would submit that in Wagner's own realization of music drama, in its transformation from vision to existence, he diminished its ability to serve as a means to achieve nationalistic ends. Now, I can well understand the potential objections to this somewhat, or perhaps very utilitarian approach to Wagner's mature works, and with it, my somewhat narrow take on the notion of national art. Of course, from the Ring to Parsifal, Wagner was very self-consciously set about creating works that he understood and that we can fully understand as German. Nonetheless, precisely because he never abandoned his dreams of national conscience raising through the theater, we also need to point out that in these stage works, Wagner's artistic agenda is largely at cross purposes with his nation-building yearnings. As Karl Dahlhaus has pointed out, by the end of his career, Wagner had successfully done for opera what Beethoven had accomplished for the symphony, transformed it into serious music. This came at the cost, however, of rendering Wagner's music dramas largely inaccessible to most German listeners. Already in terms of time, they required a considerable investment on the part of theatergoers, but on top of that, one must factor in the linguistic peculiarities of Wagner's libretti and the complex musical language he developed in the scores. Finally, we should note that the demands posed by staging these works challenged the resources of even the top-tier theaters, which itself posed serious limitations on them even being performed and thus attended. In raising these points, I do not overlook the fact that, especially after 1870, Wagner adapted a much more detached posture vis-à-vis the contemporary world, a posture that reflected both his pretensions as a serious artist and his continued frustration over the lack of public recognition and support for his accomplishments and contributions to the German nation. For instance, in the essay Public and Popularity, which appeared in the Bayreuther Blätter in 1878, Wagner disparaged the German public and opinion makers as pompous Philistines who were not only incapable of understanding true art, but especially in the case of academics, wholly unqualified to exert a positive influence on the German people. Here, as elsewhere in the writings of the period, Wagner's notion of the folk tends towards the abstract rather than the concrete. And yet, in all of this, the underlying problem of trying to understand in what sense Wagner's music dramas could serve as national art, especially according to the definitions he himself established, remains unresolved. The problem has certainly not gone away. In To What End This Knowledge, published in 1880, that is Was nützt dies Erkenntnis, as an addendum to Religion and Art, Wagner pointedly laments that, quote, whereas I have heard few objections to my comments about the decline of public art in Germany, my thoughts about its regeneration have been met with intense opposition. That is, we are very much back at the program of cultural regeneration through music drama, and perhaps as other passages of this essay, intimate restrictions on the artistic activities of Jews in Germany. But in the twilight of this German master, what seems equally evident is that he essentially concluded that Germany as it currently existed was not ready for his music dramas. They existed in his mind thus as exemplars of German art, as theater pieces fully capable of inculcating and nourishing German values and notions of German community. But in Wagner's estimation, the realization of this potential would have to wait for a future age. We are thus, at least in part, back in the realm of cultural nation building in terms of Werden rather than Sein. Indeed, in the essay, The Public in Time and Space, itself a kind of supplement to public popularity, Wagner even goes so far as to compare his situation with that of Jesus Christ. They were both two national champions fully misunderstood by the contemporaries. And still, I would suggest the question remains, given the very nature of these mature works, could they ever be popularized, in a broad sense of the term, in a way that would properly realize Wagner's nationalist longings? So in the guise of a conclusion, I'd like now to return to the second set of questions I posed at the beginning. Namely, what, if anything, might these reflections on music, drama, and cultural nation building mean for how we think about Wagner, music, and notions of nationalism, especially in 19th century Germany? The first observation I would offer, even if it might be seen as an article of faith among historians, is that to address such questions, and they are questions of considerable importance, it is essential that we treat Wagner as pretty much any other historical phenomenon and set him in context. Given the amount of ink that historians have spilled, exploring the topic of German nationalism and national identity in just in the past 25 years or so, I continue to be astonished at how little resonance this has found in studies devoted to Wagner as a national figure, at least until very recently. Whereas the internalist take on Wagner's contributions to the German national idea have tended to underscore the uniqueness of the composer's efforts, as well as contemporaries' failure or mere slowness in recognizing his worth as a German musician, dramatist, and author. When we look beyond the Bayreuth bubble, what is striking is how much Wagner had in common with his contemporaries. Admittedly, only Wagner held out opera or music drama as a privileged vehicle for building a German nation through cultural means. But as historians such as our own Celia Applegate here, Alan Confino, and Siegfried Weichlein have all emphasized, the process and projects of cultural nation building in Germany did not at all end once the German Empire had been established in January of 1871. Building on this first observation, a second point we might advance would be that Wagner's true significance as a promoter of Germanists and the real basis for his music drama stature as German art is somewhat different than from what Wagner believed it should be. For reasons that Wagner never seemed to want to admit, his operas really could never hope to serve as successful agents of popular national enlightenment. To the end, they remain closely tied to the German bourgeoisie's ideal of Bildung, to which Wagner himself, we might say, had a sort of love-hate relationship. He hated its lack of idealism, its increasing materialism, while still loving, or perhaps better, sharing the educated Bürgertum's conviction that it really did represent the heart and soul of Germany. This said, if their form established considerable barriers to grasping their content, and if the experience of Wagner's mature dramas as theater pieces, and not just as concert or ensemble music, remained limited to a relatively privileged few, by the time of Wagner's death, his stage works were quickly on their way to being recognized inside and outside of Germany as peerless examples of German art. Indeed, by the centenary of the composer's birth in 1913, not only did tributes to Wagner ring out across Europe, but as a number of commentators noted in 1913 and then again during the Parsifal year of 1914, Wagner's music was proving to be a much more effective ambassador of German culture and Germanists than the policies of the imperial government itself. Finally, and admittedly there really isn't sufficient time to develop this theme yet this afternoon, reflecting on the meaning of opera as national art today raises broader questions about the relationship between music and German national culture. There is no doubt that through their accomplishments in music drama, the symphony, which Wagner incidentally viewed ultimately as inferior to music drama as a medium for disseminating national ideas, and professional musicology, German artists and scholars have fostered this powerful image of Germany as the land of serious music. But is the only kind of music that is important when discussing national culture or national identity serious? Indeed, where does music, and not just opera, fit into the broader patterns of German cultural and social life in the 19th and early 20th centuries? especially if we look at social strata lying below the cultured bourgeoisie. It may well be that such research may do little to alter Wagner's status as an icon of German national culture in the 19th and 20th centuries. But it may very well help to refine our understanding of what that iconic status actually meant to Germans, both during Wagner's lifetime and in subsequent generations. Thank you very much.
Questions?
Technical difficulties.
Yes, it's not easy to manage. Yes, Santa.
I think that, I could think of examples of opera being very important to German culture before Wagner. But actually, I think the more interesting thing for me is that then I just kind of started wondering, how much have I been brainwashed by Wagner to believe that this would have been the genre that would have been the only real possible thing through art to build a cultural Germany. So I think it's actually worth considering your question. Although I think I can also think of a lot of objections to it.
Along those same lines, I do think important consideration should be given before Wagner to the works of Weber, for instance, and their role in nation building, and then past Wagner and elements of Wagner reception to what happens when, in the environment, especially of Bayreuth and Munich, Wagner's works are interpreted as something predominantly or exclusively or intrinsically Germanic. And that is a process that does indeed reach a kind of climax in the years before World War I. Mm-hmm. And it's a very disturbing process. One thinks of the role of Houston Stewart Chamberlain, who settles as Wagner's son-in-law, marries Eva, joins the clan in 1908, of someone like Leopold von Schroeder, who publishes in 1911 a work in which he declares that Bayreuth itself is an ideal center for Aryan peoples, the culmination of a process over 5,000 years. All this nationalistic nonsense gathers steam, and long before 1933 creates the environment out of which the nightmare emerges.
No, definitely, and with the remarks on Weber and other things, what I was trying to get at and kind of thinking through Wagner's ideas here was, again, this is how Wagner's positioning himself. We know that he had a fair amount of respect for Weber and other Germanic composers of opera, but he very clearly writes, starting 1849, 1850, into the 1970s, maintains this posture that he's the only person out there who is really writing music drama, that all other German activities are musical activities, and strikingly, even at the level of the symphony, are not sufficient for the cultural nation-building project that he thinks Germany desperately needs. So in terms of what he is doing during his lifetime, I think it's very much a posturing exercise that he is involved in, and his contemporaries bought into it too. The allusion I made to Verdi, and thinking through this, I went back and read through some of the ways in which Verdi and Wagner were being compared to one another, and for the musicologists in the rooms, not a big surprise that Verdi suffered tremendously at that comparison. He wasn't serious enough. You know, he was just a popularizer of tunes. But he was actually the one, and part of the reason why I mentioned the way that I did, that his music actually did get a very broad audience. People came to it and listened to him, and he was popularly acknowledged as being a major contributor to Italian unification. In terms of the afterlife of Wagner's ideas, yes, the Circle, the company that he began to keep at the end of his life, and the way that they decided in part to promote his legacy takes on very alarming tendencies. But I think there is also the question of appropriation of a legacy of which perhaps the seeds were only beginning to be planted at the end of Wagner's life.
Any other questions?
Oh, yes. One name that might put some of Wagner's ideas about a national theater in context is Franz Dinkelstedt, who opened and launched the longest-running national theater festival in Munich in 1875. Okay. And there's a lot of great tension between Munich and Bayreuth in this period. Munich launching its first Wagner Love-In 1888 with all but Das Liebesverbot and Parsifal. But Dinkelstedt was an interesting figure, and he was in the circle that when Liszt premiered Lohengrin in Weimar, and he wrote the prologue that was delivered before. And he was working on the idea of very much the same thing as a national ensemble, like scrap the idea of having an in-house group that works there year long. I want to cherry pick the best actors from all around German regions for my theater troupe, same approach to the way that Wagner approached his orchestra in Bayreuth.
Might I just add to that? He also found an alternative national poet for Germany, which was Shakespeare. And it's really from Dinkelstedt that the idea that Shakespeare really wasn't an Englishman at all, well, it doesn't originate with him, but he certainly was one of those who encouraged it.
Great. We will not soon forget the name of Dinkelstedt.